doing a little work on Grizzly today. A couple of things. Gonna finally get around to putting a new fuel gauge indicator in because I ran out of gas the other week, and that was annoying. And the other reason why I ran out of gas is because this fuel shut-off mechanism has never worked correctly. It's supposed to have an off position, an on position, and a reserve position. And no matter what position you put it in, fuel always flows. So you can't like run out of fuel in the on position and then switch it over to reserve and have some time left to go. It doesn't work that way. The other problem is it doesn't shut off, which I always like to leave it shut off if the bike's going to be sitting for a while, because just in case, if for some reason your float sticks, you don't want to completely flood out your engine with gasoline and have it run all over the ground out of the vent bowl, the bowl vent line. And also I noticed now that this hasn't been working for a while, it's also now leaking a little bit. So that's also not good. With gas being as expensive as it is, you don't want your gas basically dripping all over the ground. Not to mention, not good for the environment. So I was going to buy the parts necessary to disassemble this and rebuild the internals of this. And they run about $11 plus shipping. Well, for about $25, I got the whole unit. So that's what I decided to do, is buy the whole unit. Another reason to replace the whole unit is when I take this out, you're going to see that the two feed lines that stick up into the tank, one shorter than the other, that's how the reserve and on things work. And they actually probably have screens on them. And so since this is original to the machine, I'm sure it's probably long overdue that they be cleaned. But I'm just going to replace them. I also got a new gasket for where this joins the tank. So for starters, I needed to take the screw out that holds the knob on, because it's easier for me to get the thing to clear the frame with that off. So I've also got the tank fairly low on fuel. I wish it was drained completely, but it's not. And of course the rear bolts are out for the tank. So, and these bolts that I never replaced for these plastic pieces are out. So I should be able to flex these out of the way enough, tilt the back of this up, disconnect the line, and get that tank out completely. Yeah, I don't remember. I thought that this just hooked in the front, that the tank just hooked into the front, but I can see actually the bolts in there, so they might have to be removed. So it's being a little stubborn. I'm going to see whether or not I can just unbolt the rack and tilt this up far enough to get a wrench in. Yep, now that I get it lifted up and take a look at it, this doesn't have a slotted front to the hole that is at the front of the tank. So I have to remove that little bolt right there with the washer and the one on the other side before I can pull the tank off. Alright, once I get those two bolts out of the front there, it's pretty easy to tilt it up and back, but you've got to disconnect the fuel line first. I'm going to have to work fast here because I can't have the luxury of having this in the off position and only having a little bit of fuel drip out of here. What's going to happen is as soon as I take this line off, fuel's going to start flowing because my shutoff does not work. So luckily my fuel tank is fairly low. I pretty much timed this so that I was low on fuel before I attempted it. That way I didn't have to go through the trouble of draining the whole tank off. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect the line, and I'm going to pull this up quickly and tilt the tank to the right and allow most of the gas to flow over onto the right side of the tank over that hump area there. And hopefully that will minimize the amount of gas I end up spilling. Okay, I've got the tank out and I've got it on the ground tilted up. And again, because I don't have a lot of fuel in there, all the fuel's down to the rear of the tank here, and I can easily now take the valve assembly off by removing those two large Phillips head screws and remove the valve assembly from the tank. Wow, get a load of the crud on this thing. The way this works, in case you've never seen one of these out before, let's see if I can put it down so I can point to it. Basically, you've got this long tube that sticks up with a little screen on the top of it. That's your main fuel, goes in there. When it's in the on position, fuel enters that tube. Once the fuel level in the tank gets down below this screen, you now no longer get any fuel. You then rotate the knob to the reserve position, which then turns on this lower input tube with the screen on it, and that one goes all the way to the bottom of the tank. So that's your reserve. So basically from this point up here until the tank runs down to where fuel can't get down this tube any longer, that's how much fuel you have in the tank as a reserve. And of course my problem is that no matter what position I put this valve in, fuel always flows. So what happens is it basically runs the tank out and it dies, and then I'm stuck with no fuel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this whole assembly. This has got a lot of corrosion on it and crud. I mean, there's some real gunk on there. So I'm kind of surprised, but I guess what I'll do is I'll let some fuel flow over a bucket out of this tank, slosh it around and see if any crud comes out of there that might be settled in the bottom of the tank here. Make sure that that's all clear before I put the new assembly in. Here's the brand new unit, and it's identical to the old one by the looks of it. Got nice clean screens on there. They even put a protective tube on the top screen here, which is interesting. I'm sure you're supposed to remove that. That's probably just for packing to protect it so it doesn't get broken. So I gotta slide that off. And in case anybody needs it, the part number for that is a 5GT-24500-01. The new assembly does come with this unusual shaped O-ring that acts as a gasket. So you don't have to order that. You can order that as a separate part if that's all you need. So if you get a leak between your tank and that valve, you can just order that gasket and replace it. But if you're just ordering the replacement valve, don't bother ordering the gasket as a separate part because it comes with it. And then what it doesn't come with is you have to reuse the screws, and there are a couple of these little fiber washers that are on there. They have to be peeled off the old assembly. So if you think of it, when you're ordering this, you want to order a couple of those washers. They have their own part number. But you can just reuse the old ones if you can get them off without tearing them all up. Now it's in the on position, so I'm going to shift this to the off position and remove this little cap. And now I'm going to put the tank vertical. Make sure there's fuel sloshed around to that side of the tank. Check for leaks. Looks like a good seal. And it's shutting off the fuel flow like it's supposed to. So now I'm going to reinstall the tank. Alright, I've reattached the gas line, tightened the clamps, and turned the fuel on and checked for leaks, and it looks good. Just want to make a note that when you're reinstalling the tank, to make sure that rubber flapper gets into the correct position, otherwise it could fall down and end up on top of the hot engine and, I don't know, might melt, I guess. Now get up under here and reinstall the two tank bolts. Alright, I've reattached the cargo rack, and now I'm ready to install my new fuel gauge. The old fuel gauge, basically there's this metal clip right here that they, I think they call it a housing. And this clip actually has little tabs that when you push it down, it will snap into place into these little spots right here on the side. Now, once it pushes past that point there and clips in, it's pretty much kind of like a one-shot deal. So to get this off, you have to pry it off, and when you pry it off, it ruins this, basically. It bends it all up. So when you get the new fuel gauge is a part number 4SH-24260-10. It does not come with this piece. You have to buy this piece separately. So make sure you get one of these if you're replacing this. This is basically just a smooth plastic hole, and this has got almost like a cork or barbed effect. So when you're putting this in, just slide it down, push it down in. You want to make sure that you've got this oriented correctly. In other words, in a way so that you can read it while you're driving, as opposed to say like upside down like that. Because once you get it in, it might be hard to move it around. There's also like an O-ring right here that seats to this inside edge. This outer O-ring also keeps water from migrating around this dial and getting in there. So I'm going to install that. Okay, now that that's installed, I'm now going to install this outer housing piece. The housing part number is 4SH-24261-00, and that goes on a very specific way also. you'll notice there's a slot right here at the top, this little cutout area. That corresponds to the little cutout area above the 1/2 mark. If you look real closely, you can actually see it on there. So you want to make sure that that's lined up over that. That also causes this little pushed-in tab here that locks it down to fall right down onto that slot where it needs to be. So it's basically just a matter of lining it up and pushing straight down. Piece of cake. Now I have a new fuel gauge. Now I'm going to top off the fuel and put the cap back on. Well, it's not the most accurate gauge in the world. It actually started reading full a little while ago. I still have got some room there. Of course, that might be for airspace. But it also seemed like I had to put quite a lot of fuel in before it even started registering anything above the empty mark. So, not the most accurate gauge in the world, but hey, at least it tells you what's going on, basically. I mean, you know if you're down here that you should think about putting fuel in. And then, of course, now, even if that gauge isn't so great, at least now I've got a properly working shutoff valve so I can run it out of gas in the on position, hit it over to reserve, and still get maybe like 5 miles out of it before I have to run out completely. Well, we'll call that a success.